Good early evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am once again delighted to moderate a conversation with Professor Robert P. George. When I was introducing him on Friday in a more formal setting and setting up his lecture, I was talking about him being a McCormick Professor of Jurisprudence at Princeton, one of the most prestigious universities in the world, of him having received numerous degrees from the top universities, including Harvard and Oxford, many honorary degrees. But perhaps I'll try to do something a little shorter, simpler here, and I would simply say that Robert P. George is a truth-seeking, his parish church attending, banjo playing, life defending, and kindly the other people kindly treating person. And perhaps we have seen some of these things on Friday. We saw his intellectual depth, his experience with engaging some very technical debates as well as very practical debates that are important for maintaining and preserving a free society. But what we can do today, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity to get to know him as a person a little bit. And this is a Plato's cave. So I'm not sure what this is supposed to mean. Is this supposed to mean that Robert P. George is the enlightened philosopher who has seen the good and has descended into the caves of Eastern Europe, what might be perceived as Eastern Europe, even though we'd like to call ourselves Central Europeans? But I am sure, and I know for a fact, that maybe it's not the caves, but the minds that are very close to your background and upbringing. So when we hear someone say, "I'm an American, I'm from the United States," you cannot really imagine anything really specific. You might imagine New York, you might imagine deserts of Nevada, but please paint us a picture of your background. Where do you come from? What kind of an American are you?
Well, first, Jan, thank you very much for moderating the discussion today, and I'm delighted to be in Plato's cave. For reasons that I imagine I will have an opportunity to discuss in the course of this conversation, Plato is a very important figure in my own personal and intellectual and spiritual journey. We remember you fondly from when you were a student, a visiting student with us in the James Madison program. I intend to get you back to the James Madison program. You can't get too much of a good thing, and you're a very good thing. I will say that if some of my secular progressive colleagues were here and heard you introduce me as a person who treats others kindly, they would laugh. They think I play rough. But I love the rough and tumble of ideas. I love to have an argument, to exchange reasons for believing what we believe and engage our differences. And I don't think that there's any reason to be especially gentle in doing that. I think it can be done in a respectful and civil manner, but at the same time in a robust way. Okay, so to your specific question. I was born and brought up in the hills of West Virginia. West Virginia is a state about midway between the South and the North. It was literally carved out of the state of Virginia, which was the northernmost state of the Confederacy, the Southern Confederacy, during the American Civil War. West Virginia was the part of the state, the mountainous part of the state, where there were no plantations, no cotton, no tobacco, and therefore no need for slaves, and therefore no slave economy, and therefore no particular commitment to defending slavery. So the western part of Virginia seceded from the rest of Virginia and became an independent state. It's on the eastern side of the United States, going west to east, in the heart of what are called the Appalachian Mountains. The culture in which I grew up was founded on an economy almost entirely reliant on coal mining. We didn't have very much in West Virginia except coal. It was not a place where you could farm because of the mountains. It was not a place where it was convenient to place factories or other production facilities. What it had was coal. And so the economy of the state was built on coal. That produced a kind of radical inequality economically. There were the small number of people who owned the coal mines, and they were very wealthy. And then the large number of people who worked in the coal mines, and they were quite poor. I came from the half of that divide which worked in the coal mines. Both of my grandfathers were coal miners. And they were both also immigrants, which was unusual in that part of the world. Most of the people who lived there and who worked in the mines had families who had come to America in the 17th century, or some even in the even a little bit earlier. They were from Scots-Irish backgrounds. They had settled in those hills. They had created their own culture, their own way of life. So immigrant families were unusual. My father was born to Syrian immigrants, Antiochian Orthodox Syrian immigrants. My mother was born to Italian immigrants from Calabria, the poorest southern part of Italy. So I grew up in that situation. Neither of my parents had been to university. My father was drafted, conscripted into military service in 1944. As he was finishing high school, he wasn't even able to complete high school. He was drafted, he was sent off to basic training, and then sent to fight in Normandy and Brittany. The school sent his parents a diploma later. He didn't attend a graduation or anything like that because he was fighting in France. In fact, as I mentioned to the group I spoke with this morning, my father was one of the American Army soldiers who was on the troop carrier called the Leopoldville, a Belgian troop carrier that was sunk, was struck by a German torpedo from a U-boat crossing the English Channel. Half the men on the boat died in the waters of the channel. The other half were rescued. My father was among those rescued, of course, and because he was uninjured, he was just sent on to Normandy to fight. As a result of being conscripted into the service and learning some skills in the military, when my father returned at the end of the war, after serving with the occupation forces in Vienna, he did not have to go into the coal mines. He had other opportunities. He was too poor to go to university, but he had other opportunities, and he was able to make his life and not be in the coal mines, as a result of which I'm not in the coal mines. Had he been in the coal mines, I probably would have ended up in the coal mines, and this would go continue to go on, as it has for many people in the United States. But because he didn't, I didn't have to, and he and my mother very much insisted that the 5 sons, I'm the oldest of the 5, all boys in our family, would go to university. They didn't, but they very much wanted us to do that. And so I was the first, being the oldest, to go off to university. You may be interested in hearing a bit about the politics of West Virginia. When I was growing up, West Virginia was a very Democratic as opposed to Republican. The party was Democratic state, except for the small number of people who owned the coal mines. They were Republicans. But the people who worked in the coal mines, so the vast majority of people, were Democrats. I like to say, there's some truth in this, that where I grew up, not only did we dislike Republicans, we didn't know any. They lived out of state in big fancy homes, not in the state where our fathers and grandfathers labored. But being Democrats, and in those days what counted as liberals, what counted as the left, very different from what counts as the left today. In those days, They were Democrats, they were of the left, and they believed in four things. Jesus Christ, very religious people, Jesus Christ, mostly Protestant, some very small Catholic, very, very small, only my family, Eastern Orthodox. But they believed in Jesus Christ, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the Democratic Party, and the United Mine Workers of America, the Union. And that shaped my political consciousness. As a student, especially when I got to high school, I was very active in debate, in competitive debate, and I was very good at it. I would win debates. I knew how to make winning arguments. I was good at rhetoric. Not so good at thinking, I later learned, but very good at making winning arguments. I was also very active in politics. Twice I was elected the so-called governor, they call it governor, of the Democratic Party youth organization called the West Virginia Democratic Youth Conference. I was very much involved in that. I was raised in the Catholic Church in my mother's tradition, mainly because we had a Catholic church in my town. We had no Syrian Orthodox church anywhere in the area at all. So while I was brought up with an appreciation of the Eastern traditions of Christianity, I was brought up, baptized, confirmed, and so forth in the Catholic Church. I got very involved in the music of our region. It's called bluegrass music, a form of country music. I call it Appalachian classical music. I became a banjo player and became very active with bands and performing and so forth. But that was really my growing up. And when I thought about college, when my parents talked about university, when they pressed us that we had to do well in school so that we could get a place in the university, the understanding that I had and the understanding that my parents had and the understanding that my parents pressed was university is the ticket to rising in the world. It is the ticket to better income, more money, to a professional career, not having to work with your hands, to higher social rank, social standing, so people don't look down on you as poor hillbillies anymore, that you will have more stature in the world. And that sounded right to me. It was all I knew.
Seems to have worked out well for you, right?
Yes, it did work. That's true. So I had a very instrumental view of education. It's not that I had considered the alternative view and rejected it. I had never considered the alternative view. What is the alternative view? Here comes Plato. The alternative view is the view that I only encountered when, in my second year at university, I was assigned for the first time one of Plato's dialogues, the Gorgias. I'm sure that before arriving at university, I had never heard of Plato. We didn't talk much about Plato or Aristotle in West Virginia. And I certainly had not read a dialogue of Plato's until I took a survey course, what we call a survey course, an introduction, very broad introduction to political theory, beginning with the ancient Greek thinkers, with Plato and Aristotle. And so I had to read Plato's Gorgias. I wasn't excited about it. I didn't even buy the text. I thought, not worth the money. I went to the library, checked out the text from the library, sat down. I can remember to this day, if we were there, I could show you exactly where I was sitting, in the corner, in my chair, reading the dialogue, and my life was being transformed as I read. I read the dialogue, and of course, Plato has Socrates engaging with the sophists. What are the sophists arguing? That the purpose of debate, discussion, dialogue, what we do when we're trying to discuss and learn, that the point of this is purely instrumental, to win debates, to talk for victory. The sophists were paid well by affluent Athenian families to teach the sons of the great families how to be effective orators, rhetoricians, speakers who won arguments, so that they could rise in Athenian society, in the public sphere, or preserve the family standing in the society. And what does Plato do? He shows us that the sophists are on the wrong side. This purely instrumental view of dialogue, discussion, debate is incorrect. that the real reason, the fundamental reason, the good that is to be achieved is not an instrumental good, something to which debate and discussion and the achievement of knowledge is a means. The real fundamental constitutive purpose of debate and discussion is the truth itself, considered as something not of mere instrumental value, but of intrinsic value, as an inherent enrichment of the human being as a rational creature. Well, no one had ever told me that before. I'd never considered that option before. But suddenly my instrumentalized view of my education, I realized was wrong. I realized I'm on the wrong side of this debate. I'm siding with the sophists. I need to get on the side of Socrates. It was like a light bulb went off over my head. It was completely transformative. And I knew from the moment I was reading the text, it was an epiphany. I knew that nothing is ever going to be the same now. That for the first time in my life, well, not quite the first time, but almost the first time in my life, I'm going to have to think. Instead of just defending my tribe's positions, the Democratic Party, Catholic Church, whatever it is, instead of just adopting my views and defending my views for tribal reasons, and being a good debater who was good at winning debates and using good language and being effective, that I would have to think. And so suddenly I found myself in a strange position. I was examining everything I believed to ask myself, almost for the first time, why do you believe that? And I realized that most of what I believed for purely tribal reasons. I believed it because this is what my family believed. This is what my church teaches. This is what my community believes. This is what people believe who are the kind of people I want to be like. This is what sophisticated people are supposed to believe. This is what learned people are supposed to believe. And suddenly I realized none of those are good reasons for believing anything. I need to think for myself. I have to examine all my views. Suddenly everything was on the table. And that was both exhilarating, liberating, and terrifying. Because I didn't know where I was going to end up. And that's hard because our identities are shaped in very significant part by our convictions. Our membership in groups, our acceptance by groups, is shaped by, governed by what we believe. Groups in which I was an insider, I suddenly realized I could be an outsider. What if I don't go along? What if I find that I can't defend that view or don't hold that view any longer? So that's terrifying, that's frightening. At the same time, it was exhilarating because for the first time I was genuinely thinking for myself. And in the event, what happened was some of my views strengthened. Others changed. My religious views strengthened. I became a more committed Christian, a more committed Catholic, on the basis of my examination of the arguments and evidence and reasons for believing. My political views, by contrast, very significantly changed. I was already on the path out of the Democratic Party, out of the liberal movement, into a new place. Now, it's also true that the Democratic Party itself was changing at about this same time. This is in the period of the middle 1970s. I arrived at university at 1973. The Democratic Party's first move leftward, really seriously leftward, in what we would today recognize as left, was in 1972, with the nomination of George McGovern at their national convention for the presidency. So there I was, transformed by this epiphanal experience, and transformed not only in terms of the content of my views, but also in my vocation, because that epiphany put me on the path to doing what I do. All of a sudden, I was interested in the truth for its own sake. I desperately wanted to know the truth, and I wanted to align myself with what I believed to be true. And that made academic life something I never before would have considered, all of a sudden extremely attractive. A life in which I'm devoted to trying to get at the truth of things, examining propositions, examining the evidence, trying to develop the arguments, hearing the counter-arguments, engaging with students, learning as I teach. All that became very attractive. And as I look back, now it's not as if the minute I read Plato I decided, I'm going to be a professor. That's not how it happened. But if I look back from where I am now, and try to figure out how did I get here? a place I never would have imagined growing up in the hills of West Virginia I would end up. We can trace it back and back and back to that library, to that place in the corner, sitting in that chair, reading Gorgias. That's a very long answer, but there's my story.
So a transformative experience like that cannot simply stay in the head as a kind of belief, as a kind of proposition that you suddenly accept. You would be the first to reject some kind of dualism that what matters is just our thoughts, our ideas. It must have in some way practically changed your life, how you conducted yourself on a daily basis, how you approached your studies. So how does a young hillbilly reading Plato become a serious truth seeker who's willing to put on the table some of the very foundational ideas, thoughts, opinions for his identity?
I've never undergone a religious conversion. I did not lose my faith in high school or college like some people do and have a reversion, and I didn't ever change from one religion to another. But my understanding from people, some of you I'm sure, who've had religious conversions, is that it transforms your stance toward the world, your view of what is important, and it takes you out of yourself to considering what is important beyond you, what you must fit into, rather than the world fitting your desires or perceived needs or wants. And this was similar. It fundamentally changed my stance toward the world. I was no longer interested, I just lost interest in arguing for victory. Just lost interest in it altogether. And it's basically what I had been doing as a high school debater and in my political activity when I was young. I was talking for victory, for our tribe, for our side, for our group, for our party. Everything got concerned about truth. And that had that effect of taking me out of myself. It's not me. It's about something beyond me. And I have to bend to it. I have to bend my beliefs to the truth. Now, you're right that the difficult part of that, I tried to express this earlier, probably didn't do it well enough. You're right that what is emotionally difficult about that is that by our nature, it's just a fact of human nature that we tend to wrap our emotions more or less tightly around our convictions. So our convictions are to a large extent identity forming. And if you're willing to put your fundamental convictions on the table, you don't know who you will be once those convictions have been examined. You don't know what groups you will belong to. You don't know whether you will now be a heretic from the perspective of your political party or the people whose emotional support you've counted on, the way we all count on our friends for emotional support. Suddenly you can be an outsider. I'm no longer a person who believes in this or that used to be the thing around which this community was integrated, this belief, this cause. I ended up no longer being a Democrat, no longer being what in those days was known as a liberal, no longer thinking in the way I previously thought about things. And that's the terrifying part. That was what I was trying to get at when I said it's both exhilarating and terrifying. And I guess, I don't want to be self-congratulatory here. Believe me, I don't deserve congratulations from myself or anyone else. But the truth is that to be willing to do it takes a certain amount of either fearlessness or courage. And I think in my case, I just don't naturally feel a lot of fear. I don't think I'm a courageous person. A courageous person is a person who feels fear and nevertheless musters the strength to do the thing he is afraid to do. I'm not like that. I'll tell you who is like that, Sharif Girgis. When we wrote What is Marriage, I had no fear at all. I was just not afraid. I mean, I didn't care what they call me. It wouldn't bother me at all. I did not experience fear. People say, you were courageous to write What is Marriage. No, I just wasn't afraid. I didn't have to muster any fear. Sharif was afraid. But he mustered the courage to do it anyway, knowing that he would come under attack, that he would be called names, that it might damage his career. He was a very young man, didn't even have an academic appointment. Ryan Anderson, our third author, is more like me. He didn't have to muster courage because he doesn't care. He's not afraid. So I had that, I think, aspect of my personality that was there helpful. But for people who do feel fear, which I think is more people, I think more people are like Sharif than like Ryan or me, I think for them it really requires a great effort of strength of character, mustering that courage. And I don't come down too hard. I try not to come down too hard. Sometimes I do, but I try not to come down too hard on people who fail to muster it, because it is hard.
You must have had some great teachers on the way, because one probably does not get to have a great academic career based on something so profound simply because of reading one dialogue and simply because of reading books. So who were the people who helped you the most on the way, and in which sense they were important for a journey of seeking the truth?
I bless them every day of my life. I have had the most fantastic teachers. The first one I will mention was a man, he's still alive, named James Kurth. He was a professor where I began at Swarthmore College as an undergraduate. Now remember, I was out of the hills of West Virginia. I was not given a good preparatory education. I was a good talker, I was a good debater, but I was not given a very good preparatory education. You've heard of people who don't know anything. I didn't even suspect anything. I mean, I was so ignorant. I tried to fake it when I first arrived at because all these students who, were there from affluent backgrounds and fancy schools, and they knew all these things that I didn't know. They'd heard of things. They'd heard of Dostoevsky. Nobody ever told me about Dostoevsky. I had no idea who that was, So I try to pretend at first that I knew these, but of course that lasts about 10 minutes because you can't fake. You either know Dostoevsky or you don't. So it was embarrassing. But because I was not well prepared by my education up to that point, I was struggling. It was hard, and I didn't know if I would make it. I had a very difficult time. I was not keeping up. The other students seemed to get everything so easily, and I was barely getting anything. And I wondered whether I would have to go home, whether I would just have to give up and go home. Maybe go to a local university that was less demanding, with less where everyone wasn't an academic superstar. But there was one class I especially liked. It was not that political theory class. That was in my second year. But it was a general introduction to political science. And I happened to be assigned to a professor named James Kurth, Professor Kurth. And for the first 4 or 5 weeks, we had discussions. The class was not a lecture class. It was more like a seminar. Not exactly a seminar, but more like a seminar than a lecture. He would sort of lecture a little bit, but then we'd have discussions. And I enjoyed those very much, and I contributed quite actively. At least with political science, I had enough of a political background to be able to have opinions about things and chime in and so forth. Well, after a few weeks, we had our first examination, written examination. And I did my examination, handed it in like everybody else, off we went. About a week later, he came to class, Professor Kurth, and he had all their blue books, little pamphlets where the students have written their exams. We call them blue books. And he began handing back at the end of class, when we were over for the day, he said, now I'm going to return the exams. And he would call out the name, the person would come up, take his exam, and leave. And he went alphabetically, Anderson, Bennett, Chisholm, Derringen. But he goes past G, George, no exam. Harris, Smith, Zelinsky. I'm sitting there now by myself. He always called everybody by their last name, Mr. George. And he said, and I'm terrified, I'm saying, why am I not getting my exam back? He said, Mr. George, I'm not returning your exam. And now I'm thinking, gee, what did I do? I must have done something. Does he think maybe that I cheated somehow, or what's wrong? And he said, the reason I'm not returning it is I'm very puzzled. He said, you did not write a good exam answer. And that surprised me because I have been, hearing your contributions to the class discussions, and I think they're very good. And I don't understand why your answers on the exam did not reflect the quality of your participation and contributions to class discussions. Were you unable to prepare for the exam? Or did you not sleep well the night before the exam? Or was something troubling you? Is there a reason you did not do well? He still's not giving me my exam. And I said, well, no, Professor Kurth, I prepared. I got a good night's sleep. I thought I had done pretty well on the exam. And he said, well, you didn't. And he said, I'm curious. Tell me about your background. So I told him basically the story I just told you. And he said, oh, okay, I see. Still doesn't return the exam. He said, here's what we will do. I'm not going to return this exam. I'm not going to give you a grade on this exam. We're not going to count this exam at all. I want you to come to my office, and I'm going to give you a short assignment, not a whole essay. I want you to write a paragraph or 2 paragraphs in response to a prompt that I give you. And then I want you to come in and we're going to discuss your answer. And then 2 more weeks later, we will do the same thing. He took me under his wing. He tutored me. He gave me individual attention. And he taught me something I had not been taught to do in my school, which was write an essay. And he did such a good job that by the end, I was doing very well. And as you know, by the end of my college, I was graduating at the top academically of my class and winning all the awards and all this stuff. But I mean, in that first year, I didn't know if I was going to even be able to stay. So that was Professor Kurth. Then a second professor in my undergraduate years was named Linwood Urban, and he taught me medieval philosophy. And he was a wonderful teacher who became a model for me because of the attention and care that he devoted to his students. He genuinely, above all else, wanted them to learn, and he understood that not all students learn in the same way. So he would adjust his method of teaching to customize it for the individual student. Fortunately, I was able to study with him in small groups. The largest class I had with him was only 8 people. I had one class with only 4. And we worked almost like a little research team in that seminar, and he would work with us individually. And then, of course, when I went off to Oxford to do my doctorate, I had the astonishing blessing of working with John Finnis and with Joseph Raz. And these were 2 men who insisted, absolutely insisted, on the highest degree of intellectual, analytical rigor and logical precision. They would not tolerate flowery arguments that were good rhetoric, but not rigorous analysis. My papers would come back from Raz and Finnis covered with criticism.
How did that feel?
Not well, not good.
Even for a truth-seeking person, that was not pleasant.
You wonder, am I up to this? Can I do it? Am I going to make it? I'm back in the position I was when I was first starting out in college. But it meant you can't get a bad argument past them. You know, they would rigorously review every inference. If you made a factual claim, they needed to see the support for every factual claim. You couldn't slip and slide and try to slide things past them. And they represented different views about politics and legal philosophy. There was some commonality, but there were also very significant differences, which meant that I wasn't being indoctrinated. I was being taught by these 2 men, good friends, good colleagues, in Oxford, the leading students of H.L.A. Hart. They were both students of Hart, the great Oxford analytic legal philosopher. But I was learning how to think and how to analyze and how to write this kind of philosophy from two people who were the greatest men in the world, the greatest thinkers in the world in this area, but with different views. You can't beat that. That's just wonderful. Neither one was trying to make me into a disciple. I was more persuaded by what Finnis said than what by Raz said on points of disagreement, but I learned an enormous amount from Raz. And if you're interested at all, please read the tribute I did to Joseph Raz on his death called Joseph Raz, Philosopher of Freedom. And I tell the whole story there of what I learned from Professor Raz. So those were the four teachers that made the difference for me. James Kurth, Linwood Urban, Joseph Raz, and John Finnis.
You emphasized that you were not indoctrinated. And it seems to me that sometimes our desire, our hope, is that we, at some point, we will get hold of the education institutions, and we will be able to teach the students the right things, and we will be able to create a population that will hold the right views. And it seems that you would have something against that. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So what's wrong with imparting what you consider as right and true and correct onto the young people, well, or to the older people, more mature people? What's wrong with that?
We're going to get to that. But you know that I do not believe in indoctrination, will not tolerate it, and will not practice it because you have been at the James Madison program. And we do not do indoctrination. It's clear that I have a view about things. My students all know what my views are, but they know that one way to not get a good grade is to parrot back to me what my views are. That won't work with me. I need to know what their reasons are for believing what they believe. I want to know what criticisms they have of the views that they might have heard me articulate, or if they didn't hear me articulate, they know from my reading and so forth. There is a place for catechism class. There is a place. When a child is being brought up in a faith, when an adult is being converted to the faith, you need to know what the church teaches, or if it's not the Catholic Church, whatever the religious institution, you're converting maybe to Judaism. You need to know what the tradition teaches. And that's what catechism class is for. You've already decided you want to join up. You've already decided you want to be part of this religious community. You already have decided that this institution, say the church, has the authority to teach certain things and teaches truly. You've decided all that. So you need to know what it is that we're taught, the doctrine is. That's what catechism class is for. Universities are not catechism class. They have a different purpose. They have a different mission. It's not just to teach people what the doctrines are. It's to enable people to critically examine evidence and argumentation on disputed points so that they can arrive at their own best judgments of what is true and appropriate for themselves the knowledge they've gained through the exercise of deliberation, understanding, and judgment. And so I sometimes put to my students the following options, and I will put them to you. What if I gave you these two possibilities? Which would you choose? Option one, I will give you a fallacious argument for a true proposition about something very important that you don't know the truth of. But this fallacious argument will, despite being fallacious, persuade you, as a result of which you will believe the true proposition that you don't now believe. That's option one. Option two, I will give you a valid argument, a sound argument for the same true proposition about something important. This time, however, the argument, though sound, though valid, you will not find persuasive or fully persuasive, as a result of which you will still hang back from affirming the true proposition. You will not affirm the true proposition, at least for now. Okay, which of the two do you take? When I put that 2 years ago to a seminar of 20 Princeton students, outstanding students. Princeton attracts an unbelievably gifted group of students. This was the top of the top. These were some of the best students I've ever had in 39 years of teaching. So I put this to them, these options. They split right down the middle. Half of them immediately said, option 1, I want to know what the truth is. The other half said, option 2. Now, if I'm right, the correct answer is
2.
option 2. And to help my students who had chosen option 1 to see that option 1 is not the correct option, to give them a sense of what knowledge or knowing really is, to give them a sense that it's not just checking the right box on a multiple choice test, just having the right belief in your head about a discrete proposition. I gave them option 3. So option 3 is, look, why bother with argument? It takes time, it's messy. Instead of giving you an argument, I have here in my pocket a little pill. If I give you the pill, you will believe the same proposition. You will believe that true proposition. Much more efficient than argument. Do you want the pill or not? At this point, all 10 of the ones who opted for the fallacious argument said, no, 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 not the pill.
Not a single one?
Not a single one. Not a single one. And they could see it because that counterexample enabled them to see that knowledge, is not just checking the right box. It's not just knowing that something is the case. It's knowing how it's the case or why it's the case or how it relates to other things that are the case. That knowledge is something we appropriate, integrate into our lives. It's a matter of understanding, and that in part is understanding the reasons for the belief, the things that make the belief a true belief. So that's what I think education is about. If we could create a university where everybody lines up in the morning and we give them a pill and they suddenly start believing all the right things, would we do that? No, of course we would not do that. We need to form young men and women to be, as I always say, determined truth seekers and courageous truth speakers, and there is no shortcut to that. The only way you do it is by introducing them to dialectic, encouraging them to consider the best that has been said on this side of the question and that side of the question and the other side of the question, exposing them to the best that has been thought and said on competing sides of the question, and then trusting them to exercise their judgment, to think deeply and critically, which always includes, of course, self-critically, and for themselves. Independent thinkers. We who are Catholics should not fear independent thinking. If we are confident, as I am, as we all should be if we're Catholics, if we're confident in the truth of the faith, the truths of the faith, then we should have nothing to fear from the faith being examined, or the propositions being questioned or challenged or criticized. On the contrary, I welcome it. I think our students have to be educated so that they can't easily be tricked into abandoning the faith by very effective, we have a saying in this concept in the United States, a saying, snake oil salesman. I don't know if that means anything over here. In other words, tricksters, you know, people who are very good at manipulating people with rhetoric and so forth. So we need to train our students to be not vulnerable to that kind of manipulation. But I don't think we have to worry about students being exposed to beliefs contrary to ours and to the arguments. They'll only deepen their understanding of the truth if they're allowed to engage with critics.
Before I open the discussion, I would like to ask you to play something for us on the banjo. I think it's... Is it already here? Yes, it is. I don't know how to handle a banjo, so...
Well, we have to open it up here. Okay. There we go. So I think Jan is making me prove now all the story I told you. It's not false that I really am from the hills of West Virginia, not from New York City, pretending to be a hillbilly.
another university professor who claims to be from the working class.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
We are going to examine that proposition.
So let's see here. Thank you. Oh, okay. Thank you.
So you do know how to play one song. We'll grant you that. We might have to test you a bit more a bit later. So I open.
I'll say that when I was a kid, when I was young, small, and first learning to play the banjo, I found that it was highly remunerative. I could make money. And this put me at a big advantage over the other boys in my community, because the other boys would have to get jobs in the summer especially. They would either have what we called a paper route. They would deliver the newspaper in the morning, but they would have to be up 5:30 in the morning because people wanted the newspaper on their doorsteps at 6 in the morning. Or the alternative way to make money was cutting the lawn with the lawnmower. And this would be, you know, you're out there working hard in the heat in the summer, sweating. And I didn't have to do either of those things because I can remember what I was paid, $20 in an evening. $20, it seemed like the most money in the world. I could make $20 playing a square dance or at a fire hall or a county fair with a band that needed a banjo player. So I was spared cutting the lawns in the heat of the day, getting up at 5:30 to throw newspapers on people's doors, and I could have fun at the same time.
So I suppose we have a microphone ready, and I open the discussion now, and the discussion is open, also in the sense that you can ask pretty much anything to Professor George. He's really comfortable with that. Maybe some questions would be off the table, but I am sure that that kind of question wouldn't be asked in any way. So please, if you have a question, please raise your hand. I already see, I can barely see from this point, but I see a hand waving. So please, is there a microphone for the gentleman at the back?
Hi, this is Tom Gray. I want to thank you for coming to Plato's Cave. I thought you might talk about ideal forms or something, and I think you did an excellent job. Maybe you don't know that Slovakia has a ball season before Lent, where there are many formal dances, balls. And very often after the local Slovaks play their local songs, around midnight they start going into DJs, and Country Roads is one of the most popular. John Denver, Blue Ridge
Country
Mountains.
Roads, yes, yeah. West Virginia, of course, figures in that song very centrally. There is one mistake, though, and it has misled the entire world. The Blue Ridge Mountains are not in West Virginia. They are very close. They run along the western part of Virginia near the Shenandoah River, right along the border of West Virginia, but they're not over in West Virginia. We have our own beautiful mountains, but not the Blue Ridge.
So my question was, with respect to you being very open, in the last 20 years, not 40 years ago in college, and this is after you've been married, has there been any significant political policy that you previously advocated that you now think was a mistake? And can you discuss that?
Okay, that's a very good question. I'll have to canvass my mind here. Although I was not an enthusiastic supporter of the Iraq War, the second Iraq War, I certainly defended the war. I defended the principle under which the war was fought. Now, I think I was right to do that. I think I was right at the level of principle. But I think the war itself turned out to be disastrous. So that's one area where I just think, I certainly I didn't foresee the disaster that it would become, or that the United States would end up being hung up there in the way that it was, and ineffective in prosecuting what I think in the beginning was a perfectly good and perfectly valid mission. So there's an example. I'm trying to think if there are other policy questions. I'll continue to think as we have other questions, rather than delaying things here to think about them. But a lot of my views have not changed, I can tell you that. I'm sure the vast majority of my views have not changed. Recently, I had occasion to go back and revisit the first book I ever wrote, my book, Making Men Moral, Civil Liberties and Public Morality. There was a conference to mark the 30th anniversary of the publication of the book, and the conference was in Washington, D.C., and co-sponsored by a number of institutions. And there was some of my former students were speaking, and other academic colleagues were speaking. And so to be prepared for that, because I did have some role in responding to the points that were being made, I went back and reread the book, and I couldn't find anything in the book I disagreed with. So I didn't really change my mind about any fundamental points in political philosophy. I was a little surprised to find this, but it's true. I haven't changed my mind in more than 30 years about those points.
Okay, so yes, a gentleman, I suppose, at the back.
Yes. Thank you, Professor George. My name is Marian Kapusta. I would like to ask you a slight digression to theology question. I have written it down so I can properly formulate it. So I'm a big fan of your school of thought, the new natural law tradition, thanks to Martin Luther here in Slovakia. Although I'm not a professional, I'm not a lawyer, I'm just a lay person, so it is just out of interest. But I'm particularly interested in topics of theology, and particularly moral theology within your tradition, school of thought, I have found the writings of Germain Grisey, mainly through his website, very inspiring. So the question is, how do you recollect on him, Germain Grisey, and perhaps who could possibly further disseminate his thought, his legacy to wider audience, because it is very profound. He seems to me often neglected by many academics. I've read that there is Father Peter F. Ryan, theologian, but it seems he's retired already. So perhaps if you can comment on this, or thank you.
And can I add to that question, just because we are talking about theology, what made you take up theology and get a theology degree at Harvard, of all places?
Oh, now, Jan, you have exposed me.
Oh.
My theology degree, I must confess, is a bit of a false flag. I don't know if you have this concept of a false flag. Why? It's true that I have the degree of Masters of Theology or Master of Theological Studies. It's from Harvard. But I studied very little theology to get the degree, and I did not enroll in the degree program with a view to studying theology. I know this sounds strange, let me explain. While I was doing law school, while I was completing law school, I wanted at the same time to do more work in especially medieval philosophy and philosophy of religion. So the Harvard master's degree in theology gave me a forum, a home, a method of enrolling in courses in philosophy of religion and medieval philosophy, not only at Harvard, but also in the what they call the theological consortium that Harvard is associated with, giving you access to Boston College and several other universities that have theology departments and philosophy departments in the Boston area. And I managed to play the system in such a way as to minimize the number of courses in theology I took, because I wasn't all that interested academically in theology, and to maximize the number of courses in philosophy I took. So the reality is that that degree, although formally in theology, is really a degree in philosophy, and now the public knows that that's what happened.
Well, I cannot blame you. I have a degree in political science, and all I did was philosophy. So,
yeah, there you go.
So I get that. I
So that
cannot hold that against you.
So you didn't know me then, so it wasn't my bad influence. So
That's
you
true.
did that
That's
on
true.
your own. Yeah,
You're
so
not
right,
at
yeah.
fault for that.
Germain Grisey. To Germain Grisey, who was never formally my teacher, I owe an incalculable debt. Everyone who works, I think, in contemporary moral philosophy, especially from a Catholic vantage point, owes Germain a debt. Whether you affiliate yourself or associate yourself in some way with his particular school of thought or not, you are dealing with arguments and ideas that Germain launched. He was very kind to me personally. My doctoral dissertation was largely a critique of some aspects of his work as applied to political philosophy. Germain had a reputation in his lifetime as being thin-skinned, that is, someone who could not take criticism, who was hostile to critics. Here I was writing my dissertation as a critique of him and his student and co-author Joe Boyle, and yet he welcomed me with open arms. He read my dissertation, he responded. He granted that some points I'd made against some of his writings were valid. He argued that some other points that I was making were not valid. He engaged me as a colleague, although he was a great man and I was nobody. He couldn't have been kinder to me. When I was writing Making Men Moral, I had some points on which I needed his assistance. He invited me to his home. He and his wife Jeanette hosted me for several days, and we worked together. He was a hard taskmaster. We worked 18 hours a day, very little sleep, 18 hours a day together, working through philosophical problems in an area that was not a primary area of interest to him. But he was extremely helpful. He was disadvantaged in some ways, I think, by personal difficulties. That is, philosophical differences tended to become personal conflicts. And certainly not in my case, so I can't say that, you know, it was his fault. But to some extent, they tended to become personal conflicts, and I think that impeded his being appreciated as much as he should have been for his contributions. And I think it stiffened the resistance of some people to his ideas because they didn't like him. John Finnis and I have often said things that we have heard Germain say, and people say to us, "You're wonderful, you're so brilliant, you're so smart, this is so great." When, if Germain said the same thing, they would resist him because they didn't like him. Part of this was, I think it's fair to say, Germain himself understood that he was on the autism spectrum. I believe he had what is known as Asperger's syndrome. He did not pick up social cues and could come across with people as very harsh. He didn't mean it to be that way, but that, again, contributed to intellectual conflicts becoming kind of personal conflicts and impeded the appreciation of him. He's not nearly, the questioner is absolutely right, he's not nearly as profoundly appreciated and celebrated as he should be, given his contributions, even by people who disagree with him. Maybe someday that'll be rectified. Maybe someday the people who, you know, adulate my work and John Finnis's work and the work of Christopher Tollefson and so many others will realize that, you know, were it not for Germain, none of us would be doing any of this work. Finnis's book, Natural Law and Natural Rights, could not have been written without Germain Griset's influence and contributions. Germain and John did not agree about everything. They had differences of opinion. But there's no question that John's basic approach to moral philosophy and the foundations of natural law was shaped by Germain's thinking. How to disseminate it further, the questioner asks. I think that's a worthy project, a good thing to do, call more attention to it. I'm hopeful that as time goes on and we're more distant from the personal conflicts and more distant from Germain, the personality, and it's just the ideas on the page, which don't, you know, engender personal conflicts, that people will gain more of an appreciation for his work. It's similar, I think, to the case of the Jesuit philosopher and theologian Bernard Lonergan. Lonergan was a difficult man. He made an enormous contribution to epistemology in his book Insight, A Study of Human Understanding. I've benefited enormously from it. His work is not as well known or appreciated outside the confines of the sort of disciples that he has. It's not nearly as deeply appreciated as it should be. And there too, I'm hoping that as years go on and the personality fades into the past and the thought is now very much in the foreground, people will rediscover or discover for the first time its power and illumination. That's the best I can do with that question.
I saw a hand raised, I think, in that corner. Yes?
Good evening. My name is Szymon Sadowski. I will continue in a very friendly tone of this conversation. Thank you for that. I got basically three questions. One will be kind of personal, the other one will be political, and the other will be philosophical. Okay. First is, what was your favorite thing you bought for that all the money in the world, $20 back the days for your banjo playing?
So how did you like to spend the $20 that you... Okay. That you
yeah,
I will answer that. Okay, go
yeah, and how much one could afford for $20 back the days? I'm really curious about it because all the money in the world sounds really cool. The other question is the political one. What's your take on the role of the USA to the current conflict in Ukraine, both to the events which happened before that, which maybe led to that event, and also to the, well, possible resolution of this event? That's the other question.
Yes, in terms of the causes of the conflict, if any role at all, and the role that could be played in the resolution of the conflict that the U.S. could play. Yeah.
Okay, and third question is that I would like to challenge a bit that dilemma which you posed on your students in Princeton, considering whether they would prefer to be persuaded by false or fallacy argument for the truth claim instead of not being persuaded by a really good and well done argument to that claim. It's not that I in general don't agree with that or with your position. However, I would like to make this bit concrete, provide one example, and really would like to hear your answer to that, because I think that ideas have its consequences. So it matters whether one thinks something true to be true or not to be true. And to be concrete, okay, let's take current situation and let's take so-called gender ideology. And consider that I have a son which is 18 years old. Okay, I don't have such son yet, but consider that maybe as an experiment. And consider that he has been persuaded by this ideologist to undergo genitalia surgery. And he already, well, subscribed to the surgery and he's waiting to undergo that surgery. And time is running. And I got an option to, well, use any means I have to persuade him not to do that in order to maybe get some time to be able to persuade him even by the good argument. Or I can try to, well, do the argument very well in Robbie P. George style. However, since he is not willing to accept that, he will undergo that surgery, which will very much damage him without the possibility to reverse the damage. So does this, well, example changes something to that, or how would you answer to this objection to your position?
On that one, presumably, if you could give him a pill to change his opinion, you would give him the pill.
In this very case, that it is my son, and I got
I
exactly
understand.
1 week of time.
I understand all that, but you would give him the pill.
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, so first question: what would I do? What did I do? This is an historical fact. What did I do with all that money?
What could you back in the day for $20? You know,
Buy fishing equipment. That's what I did. My life was hunting and fishing and playing bluegrass music. This is what I loved. And I spent my money on fishing rods, fishing reels, fishing lures, fishing box to put all the equipment in, and then some other things, bow and arrow. You're getting a real sense of my hillbilly upbringing from this. As I got older, I end up spending all my money on more banjos. So I now have 7, plus 18 guitars. So I find a way to spend money on musical instruments. Second, Ukraine, yes. This is very sad. This is not funny. I am not a supporter of Donald Trump. I'm a critic of Donald Trump. I think he's less bad than Joe Biden, but that's not saying much. But I think that Trump is probably right when he says that if he were president, Putin would not have moved against Ukraine. I think that's probably true. But he wasn't. Biden was. Putin moved against Ukraine. I think Ukraine has to defend itself. This is not to defend everything about Zelensky. I have real questions about Zelensky. But I think Ukraine has to defend itself, and I think it needs to be supported in defending itself If Russia becomes more expansionist, I don't need to tell you as Slovakians, it could become very much worse for a lot of other people. My worry right now is I don't see how the war ends. I don't see the path. There has to be some sort of negotiated ending to the war. Otherwise, it's going to be more and more carnage. So I'm very troubled about this. I don't know that Trump has a plan here. I think he probably just thinks, I'll come in when I'm president again, and with the force of my personality, I will come up with some way to get a negotiated settlement that both sides can live. This is typical Trump. This is how he thinks. It's always the force of his personality that will resolve things. Now, it's true that sometimes he pulled some things off, but not always, and I don't know whether he will or won't in this case. But I fear, given the historical record, Russian expansion. Did I say Soviet before? I'm sorry, I should have said Russian.
You said Russian.
Russian expansionism. I don't think Putin is a good guy. Trump thinks Putin is a man he can do business with. I doubt that. And I don't know what comes after Putin, which may be even worse. So it's, to me, an extremely disturbing situation, and I don't see a clear way that it gets resolved. But I'd like it to be resolved without massively more bloodshed.
Well, the conversation on this could, of course, continue, but we need to resolve the gender pill.
Yeah, the gender pill. Yeah.
And if I just made to add to your question whether I would give pill to my hypothetical son, if I had a week until that surgery, I would try to persuade him with good and sound and valid arguments for the 6 days, and on the 7th day I would give them the pill and just eat it, guy, and come on, and we will argue afterwards.
Yeah. Since we're not here in the domain of intellectual abstraction, which can also have real consequences, of course, for people's lives. But since we're in this sort of emergency situation, I think we have to look at the situation holistically. The fundamental problem here is a psychological problem. It's not a problem of rational argumentation. The son in the hypothetical case is someone who's suffering from a psychological pathology, gender dysphoria. And that's got to be treated. And you do treat pathologies with things like pills. It's not a matter of abstract reasoning. Reasoning here is playing very little role in the thing at all. He's not being motivated here by his belief about the truth. He's being motivated by the underlying pathology. So it seems to me in this case the pill is like the way we treat therapeutically pathologies, including psychological ones. It's the best I can do with that.
Do we have another question? Okay, over
Yes.
there.
Hello, my name is Maciej Mihalik, and I'd like to ask you this question. You are like professor from Princeton, and you're also Catholic. So for us, it is a tremendous honor that you are here in our small country. And I was thinking, in more general terms, how could Catholics in the United States and in Slovakia collaborate in its common goal, like in evangelization, etc. For example, I could imagine that I already told you about my ideas, like exchange of personnel in healthcare. And as you are a lawyer, could you imagine something like that? Like, for example, in terms of lawyers. But my question is more broadly: how could Catholics in the U.S., in Slovakia, collaborate towards their common goal of evangelization?
Oh, yes, very good. I think certainly more exchanges between Slovak Catholic scholars and American ones. I think it's helpful when those exchanges are facilitated by institutions. So I think the institutions that Martin Lutheran is affiliated with and which he built could be very good partners for institutions that are either officially Catholic or represent a Catholic outlook or sensibility, like the Witherspoon Institute in Princeton. These could be very good partners. More people like me from the American side need to come here and learn in the way I've been learning over the past 3 days about the situation in Slovakia, the circumstances of Slovakian Catholics, what's going on here, what you are thinking about. I think all that's valuable. And I think it's valuable for people to do what Jan has done. I hope many more of you will do it. Come to the United States, spend time. Jan spent a year, I hope he'll come back. Get to know what we're doing. I think we can learn from each other. Our circumstances are not identical, but they're not completely different either in the circumstances that we're in. I think we can learn from each other, and the best way to do that is to spend more time with each other. I'm embarrassed that I knew so little about Slovakia before coming here. I didn't know what percentage, even roughly speaking, of Slovaks were Catholics, either in the formal check-the-box sense Catholic or active in the faith. I did not know about the small but significant Lutheran community. I didn't know that the leadership of that community shares many of our same values. I'm delighted to hear that. I think Catholics and Lutherans should work together more in this country, and not just on spiritual things, but also on cultural and political matters. So that is the answer to the question. More interaction, more interchange, more mutual learning, more learning about each other between the U.S. and Slovakia. My guess is because of the status of the U.S. and the wealth of the U.S. and so forth, you probably know more about us than we know about you. We need to learn more about you, and the only way we can do that is by getting to know you.
So I would follow up on that, because it's quite clear what we can learn from you and what kind of exchanges we can utilize, but it's far less clear what people coming from great institutions, from Princeton, from Harvard, can learn from the Slovak experience. And I'm not asking you to say, well, Slovakia can teach us this and that, but we are, generally speaking, a not very significant and large country. So given the level of education, intellectual life, experience with the most recent and pressing ideological challenges, what is there to learn, you think, on your side from us? Or not from us, but from other smaller countries. There's plenty of smaller countries in Europe. So
Well,
what do you think in general?
Yeah.
What could be the benefit of that for you?
Israel in Roman times was a very small and insignificant country, very backward, not wealthy, and yet it changed the world. Now you say, okay, that's divine intervention, it's a different situation. But small and allegedly insignificant countries can make a big difference. They can have an impact depending on the work that's done and the leadership that's exercised and the achievements, the intellectual and cultural achievements of the people. What you have here, what I've learned in the past 3 days, you have some extraordinary talent. And that talent is, as far as I can tell, more significant among your younger sector, even than the older people. Maybe it's just who I happen to be meeting. Maybe you have some very impressive older Catholic thinkers out there. But I'm meeting young people who remind me very much of the best of my young people in the United States, the best of my students. I'm meeting people who have the talent and the courage of Ryan Anderson and Sharif Girgis and Melissa Moskela and Rabbi Meir Soloveichik and Anna Samuel and people I've mentioned previously. I want that unleashed I want that to be unleashed on the world. And I want the same for other places, maybe Croatia. I've never been to Croatia. Maybe it has a kind of young Catholic intellectual class that should be having an impact beyond the borders of Croatia. I don't know. Maybe yes, maybe no. But I know for sure now, because I've spent 3 days with you, you have it here. Now, that means getting out, getting abroad, publishing and writing in places that are read not just by Slovak speakers, engaging, forming alliances with people in the United States and elsewhere, going for credentials and graduate degrees outside the country, in the United States, in Britain, in the elite institutions, in Oxford and Cambridge and Princeton and Harvard and places like that. There's no reason why that can't happen. And there's no reason why a country of, is 5 million maybe? And is that how many?
Yes,
5 million?
yes,
A country of 5 million can't have outsized influence on the world, including on the Catholic world. Ireland's a small country that for a long time had an outsized influence on the Catholic world. The Catholics are a tiny minority in England, but the leadership of the intellectual class of the Catholic Church in the 19th century profoundly influenced the whole church. Henry Manning, John Henry Newman, people like that. So I would not underestimate the capacity of the Slovak Catholic intellectual class to have an impact not only here positively in the Slovak Republic, but throughout the broader world.
Over
Yeah.
here.
Yeah,
in-
I
in
have,
the-
I have
okay,
the microphone.
I'm sorry.
Thank you. Eva Gray, thank you, Professor, for sharing about your youth. And I would like to ask about what would be some few books that you would recommend to some hillbillies that feel like they don't have much intellectual background and just to start, doing their thinking. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Okay. So the first book I'm going to recommend is not by a Catholic, but rather by an Anglican, C.S. Lewis. And the book is called The Abolition of Man. Very profound, but very easy to read, not difficult. Beginning college student can read the book, but something to teach even the most learned. So I would begin with Abolition of Man. Classic works. If you were like me when I entered university and you haven't read Plato, read some Plato. Don't start with the Republic. I still can't figure that one out. I think I get the allegory of the cave, but there's much in it that I don't understand. I think I understand the others, but Apology, Euthyphro, Phaedrus, there's so much to be learned from Plato. And the dialogues are very accessible, except for Republic, are really very accessible to the general reader. You don't have to have the PhD in philosophy to understand Plato's dialogues. I noticed when we were today at the center that where Martin Luther's program is, what is that called?
Collegium of Anton
Yes,
Neubert.
when we were
Collegium,
there,
yeah.
I noticed on the bookshelf the works of the late Christopher Lasch, not a Catholic. As far as I know, not a believer, although sympathetic to religion. The Culture of Narcissism by Lasch, The Revolt of the Elites, The True and Only Heaven. These are excellent books of philosophically informed sociology that I think we can learn from. The Catholic convert philosopher Alistair MacIntyre has written many good books, but two, I think, very important books, especially for Catholics to read. The first he wrote before he was a Catholic while he was on the way, After Virtue. The second, Whose Justice, Which Rationality? Very illuminating books from MacIntyre. Finnis's book, not Natural Law and Natural Rights, which is very heavy sledding, very difficult book to read. His little book from 1983, Fundamentals of Ethics, extremely illuminating. Short, it's a series of, I think, 3 lectures he gave at Georgetown, a small number of lectures he gave at Georgetown. Very accessible. I recommend this extremely highly. If you want to get a little more deeply into philosophy, the classic work by Elizabeth Anscombe of 1958, 2 works actually. One, her essay, Modern Moral Philosophy. 2, her book simply called Intention. Intention. Not Intension, not being in tension, but intention, intending, Intention. Intention. Okay, so we've talked about Finnis, MacIntyre, Anscombe, C.S. Lewis, Christopher Lasch.
Is there something that you would recommend from outside of the Western or Judeo-Christian tradition, or?
Well, when I was in college, I very carefully studied, not out of an interest in conversion, but because I found it fascinating. I studied the Theravada Buddhist tradition. This is the tradition of Buddhism in Southeast Asia, Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam. And I had the blessing of studying it with a very great Buddhist master, the monk who was the abbot of the great monastic Buddhist monastery in Chiang Mai, Thailand, Rajavara Muni. He had in those days the title Jiao-kun, which is kind of like great figure, great man, great master, Jiao-kun Rajavara Muni. And I just found that very fascinating. And as Nostra Aetate teaches, the great document of the Second Vatican Council on the non-Christian religions, we have things to learn even from the non-Christian religions. The Church teaches us in Nostra Aetate that we are to affirm all that is true and holy, all that is good and holy in the non-Christian traditions. Of course, above all, Judaism, our own mother religion from which Christianity comes, but also Islam and also the Eastern faiths, including those that are not monotheistic in the sense that that Judaism and Christianity and Islam are. So I learned a great deal from studying the Theravada tradition of Buddhism, where the central goal of the spiritual life is the extinguishing of desire, the mastering and the elimination of emotion and feeling. I was not in the end persuaded that this was correct, but there's a truth that it focuses on. The trouble is it's taken out of the context of other truths. But that doesn't make it any less a truth, and that is the need for a certain kind of dispassion in leading an upright moral and spiritual life. And Buddhism has developed its own techniques, especially in the Theravada tradition, for achieving that kind of dispassion. So I think we can learn from the non-Christian traditions. There are things that can be learned from Hindu tradition. There's an Indian tradition of philosophy, I think, that has been neglected in the West, from which we can learn. I don't know it well myself. I've had some excellent conversations with a friend whose work, she herself is Indian, whose work tries to bring Indian and Western philosophy into dialogue. So I think that is valuable. So I'm not of the view that we can simply dismiss non-Western traditions of philosophy. I think we have things to learn from them as well.
Do we still have one more question? Yes, over here, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor. So really, following your presentation from the beginning, and it's exciting, really. Well, I have two questions. One is concerning the young generation. So we had here in Slovakia for 40 years a communist and very anti-Christian regime. In the beginning, aggressive and then restrictive against the church, against the Christianity. But nevertheless, we have been able to hold the young generation within these 40 years. Now we have almost another 40 years in democracy, and we are losing the young generation in the church. And the question probably is a bit similar in the US in the present. So my first question is how to approach the young people, the teenagers and around 20s and students. And the second question, is that what's going on in the US? The US is really changing in a way we don't understand, not just this LGBT and transgender, but also, I mean, less and less democracy. What's going on and how to deal with that? Thank you.
Okay, can you help me?
Of course. So the first question is, well, how do we, at least keep the young people or engage the young people who are, and in this sense, sociologically, Slovakia is following the trends in the West, lower religiosity. The young people seem to be voting predominantly for the Progressive Party or proportionally more for the progressive parties and so on. So ideologically and in terms of faith, how to engage young people. And the second question was what's wrong with the West? What's going on? So why was it the lighthouse of freedom back in the day for us?
Yeah.
But now we can just enjoy the time lag between the worst things happening there before they come to us.
Okay, okay. First, on young people. Some of my conservative friends, many, perhaps most of my conservative friends, have contempt for social media. They think it's superficial. It encourages the worst qualities and traits. They find it exasperating, the poor quality of discourse. They want to have nothing to do with it. They won't establish social media accounts, or if they do, they don't use the accounts. They just want to stay away from it as much as possible. My friend Leon Cass is a good example of this, the great Leon Cass at the University of Chicago. I say to them, do you think it's going away, social media? You think if we avoid it, it will go away? No, it's here to stay. And the question is whether we will allow it to be handed over entirely to people to propagandize against what we believe is good and true and right and just, or whether we're going to get into the game. I say we get into the game. Social media has had some bad effects, including damaging the attention span of young people. No question. I see it in even my best students. I see the impact of social media on young people, on the attention span in particular. My friend Jonathan Haidt, the social psychologist at New York University, Haidt, Jonathan Haidt, he is now documenting the bad effects of screens and devices and social media and so forth. So I get all that. But yet, if we're to be in the battle for the hearts and minds of our young people and to fight back against the propagandizing of them, especially by the woke left, we have to play in the game. And so I myself am very active on social media. I have my Twitter account, we now call it X, my X account, 100,000 something followers, and I have my Facebook page, I have my public page, I have my private page. I try to link to things that I find interesting and good. A lot of my work is linked to by other people who have even much larger followings. And I think we have to do that. That's number one. Because that's where students get young people get their information these days. Number two, young people need to be challenged. The danger, the mistake that we can fall into is to think, if we try to make things easier for young people to stay faithful to the church, make it less demanding, cut back on the moral demands, focus on the attractive, what's the naturally attractive parts of Catholic faith, the personal piety part, and not make demands on them about morality and about sexual morality and sanctity of human life, then they will stay faithful, and then maybe later someday we can get them to affirm Catholic moral principles. Terrible mistake. Won't work. Completely will backfire. Young people will respond to a challenge, and I think you have to challenge them. Third, it's often said that young people are natural rebels, and they're going to rebel against authority in their youth, and then later, they become more accepting. Do you believe this? I think it's the opposite of what is true. I think young people are not natural rebels. They're natural conformists. And I think the evidence for that, you can test this, see if I'm right or wrong. What do you think happens when a teenager notices that he bought the wrong tennis shoes, the wrong sneakers? They're out of fashion. He's in a panic. It's the end of the world. He won't be accepted. Young people crave, it's human nature to crave, and especially when you're young, acceptance, being part of the group, being with the in crowd, and they conform. So what we have to do is not try to overcome rebelliousness, because the problem is not rebelliousness. We have to overcome conformity. And that again means challenging them, showing them the attraction of being out of step with the group, the frisson of the heretic, that there's something thrilling in thinking for yourself and not simply going along with the crowd. Try to induce in them the experience I had in that library reading Plato's Gorgias, to make them independent-minded and no longer conformists. Remember the goal. Again, I keep saying it, and I will keep saying it. The goal is to form our young men and women to be determined truth seekers and courageous truth speakers. We have to challenge them on that. And fourthly now, and finally, they need role models. They need examples. They need people they can look up to. They need to see people who embody that ideal, people who are determined truth seekers and courageous truth speakers. Because they are determined truth speakers, they don't try to indoctrinate people. They engage in genuine, robust civil discourse. They don't violate the free speech rights of people who disagree with them, the way the left does, but they encourage disagreement. They defend the rights of people who disagree with them. I founded the Academic Freedom Alliance not simply for people who agree with me. The alliance includes many people who disagree with me, many people far to the left. We are defending today on campuses and in courts people whose opinions I abominate. But that's because we believe in free speech as necessary to the truth-seeking enterprise. And young people need to see us standing on principle in that way. They need to see a person like me defending the rights of someone I disagree with, so that they will know that I'm not just a propagandist, that I am someone who is genuinely interested in the truth. I give you good news and bad news. You want the bad news first? Or the good news? Good news?
Good news.
Good news. The good news is courage is contagious. When young people see someone courageously bearing witness, going against the dogmas of the time, going against, as McIntyre put it once, the self-image of the age, questioning the dominant orthodoxies, standing up for the truth, even though it's unpopular, they find that inspiring and they want to emulate it. That's the good news. Now the bad news. Justice.
Can we leave that out?
No, you get the bad. You got it. If you want the one, you have to have the other. The bad news is, just as courage is contagious, so is cowardice contagious. If they see my generation or the generation between mine and the rising generation, they see the leaders, the people who are supposed to be the intellectuals or the leaders of the church or the leaders of political parties, the person who's supposed to be Catholic and leading a political party, if they see them cowering in front of these bullies, if they see them allowing themselves to be intimidated into silence, you know, holding an office but doing nothing to advance the most important causes, the sanctity of human life, marriage and the family, they will emulate that cowardice as well. So it's up to us what example we set for the young people. They'll follow it. The question is what it will be. Will it be an example of cowardice or will it be an example of courage? And the only way that we will reach the right outcome is if we decide, I am going to be the person who sets the example of courage.
Now, unfortunately, due to the shortage of time, we will have to leave aside your comments on the general decline of the West, which could be a topic for a whole new discussion. But I think I've noticed you secretly swallow a few banjo pills. Oh, okay. So can we ask you? Yes, that would be great. Ladies and gentlemen, please, another round of applause for Robert P. George, his knowledge, his experience, the kind words of encouragement he shared with us, and last but not least, his genuine skill in banjo playing.